This is Joe Green, and I'm here to share a couple of thoughts with you. Uh, Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And I would just ask you, if you will, to like, subscribe, and share to my videos. And also, before I get started, a special shout out to all those who have been subscribing to the channel, YouTube channel, and all the other social media channels that we are employing. Also, TikTok. So we've been using TikTok a lot lately. And there's a couple of reasons why, and I think that it's important for us to broaden our social media reach because there's so much that's happening out there with people being censored and deplatformed, and also a lot of times I think that I get a shadow ban. Shadow ban, for those of you who may not know, is when people even who subscribe to your channels, they can't see what you're posting. For whatever reason, the algorithm doesn't pick it up, or maybe someone doesn't like your message, and so it doesn't go out there like it could. So that's why I think it's important to please like, subscribe, and to all my different channels, if you will, if that the information that I give you is something that you feel is beneficial to you. And also, I encourage you to share it with other people, because even if you don't believe me, what I'm saying, which I try to say all the things that I believe are true, and I also try to give you receipts to back it up. But maybe you share it with someone else and you can have a discussion about it, and maybe they may give you some other insight as well. So it's important. And also, as I get started, I want to share with you my latest book that I've written. I've written 7 books, 8, depending on how you look at it. Some of them may not be considered books, but manuscripts, but written 8 books. And this is my most recent one. It's called The Religion of Race. And it's deconstructing the social construct to create a path for healing and reconciliation. And we are in a time where healing and reconciliation is so much needed. And one of the main issues of division, aside from politics, is race. And you have to recognize that race is one of the constructs, the social constructs that the enemy uses to divide us, to have us hating each other, and to make humanity go into chaos and all the other bad emotions and all the bad energy that the enemy wants to have us to operate in. Because you got to realize, as human beings, you're a spiritual being. And so, the Bible tells us in particular what type of fruits that we should bear, right? The fruit of the spirit: love, joy, happiness, peace, and those type of things. And if you look at it from an energetic standpoint, when you operate in joy and love and those type of things, it's a positive energy that is emanating from you, that not only benefits you in your health and in your mental health, but also it makes the atmosphere better around you. And so we should focus on those things that are of good report: love, joy, reconciliation. We should always seek those type of things, and we should avoid emotions, I should say, like fear, hatred, anger, and all those other negative emotions that the enemy would have us to manifest in our lives, right? Because God wants you to focus on the good things, right? So you have, just think about laughter. Laughter is a something that helps to increase your health, right? The Bible even talks about it. And so when we focus on positive, uplifting things, it is good for your health, both physically and emotionally, and it also helps to make a better society and community around you. And so not only should you try to function in those areas, but also to teach others to do that, especially your children and your grandchildren. I went to a graduation today, elementary school graduation. Aside from being a pastor and other things, I'm also a big brother to a young man who was in 5th grade. And when I went to the graduation, I saw a lot of positive things. Now, I have worked with young people for several years, and I will say that usually the ones that I find that have the worst results, like bad academic performance, or sometimes it's not only bad academic performance, but just bad overall environment, getting into trouble, having a bad attitude. These are things a lot of times that are passed down and learned from their parents. And so it's important for us to pass down positive things, positivity, pass down these emotions that help to make us physically, mentally, and spiritually better, right? I think that one of the reasons that we have so much mental health and so many mental health challenges in our society is because we're meditating on death and bad emotions like anger, disrespect, fear, and all that other stuff. And those things do have a lasting impact on you physically, in your health, emotionally, and spiritually, and all other aspects of your life. But I want to share, as you can see, that I'm talking about the war for our children. Now, if you hear what I just said about teaching and passing on certain things to your children, this really goes into what I want to talk about today. And again, if you find any benefit to this, please like, subscribe, and share these videos. I also want to remind you once again, for those of you who are just coming in, The Religion of Race is my latest book. You can DM me and you can pre-order one, get one of the first copies. It's going to be live on Amazon and other platforms, but right now you can get it directly through me if you DM me, send me a message, or email me. So anyway, let me share some things. When we look at what is happening in the world, when you really want to look at the big picture, because I'm a big picture kind of guy, in order for you to understand what is occurring and to come up with some kind of solution or suggestions, you can't look at just what you see in front of you. You can't just look in the present and see what you see in front of you and make a informed decision. In order for you to really understand what is occurring in this modern era that we're in, you have to look at past and future. And what do I mean by that? If you look at the enemy and those people who oppose the plan of God in the world, right? The globalists, the whatever you want to call them, right? The globalists, the Illuminati, those people that are part of what the Bible calls the synagogue of Satan. If you understand their plan and their strategy for humanity, you have to recognize that they don't do things just in the immediate. When they do things, they do it based on a long, slow process to get to where they want to get to. As a matter of fact, there's a term that they use. It's called the long march forward, the long march forward. And so when they plan things, they're planning it multi-generationally. And so the plan that you see now unraveling in front of you is a plan that was devised over 100 years ago. And I'm going to talk about it. So if you don't understand the historical context as to what you see before you, there's no way for you to fully understand it. And there is even less of a chance of you being able to overcome the schemes and the strategy of the enemy. The Bible tells us to know the schemes of the enemy so that he does not take advantage of us, right? So when we see these things, we have to be able to discern it historically and not look at just what we see in front of us. And so here's a couple of quotes, because one of the most influential people of the 20th century, one of, I talked, if you didn't see my video about Aleister Crowley and his impact on the media and entertainment and the culture, then you should look at this as well. And this is another person who is and you can argue maybe more influential, a more influential person of the 20th century, and that was Karl Marx. Now, we know Karl Marx started before the 20th century, actually in the 19th century. He really kind of laid the foundation for what he was doing through the Communist Manifesto and his philosophy that has become so prevalent in the world that we see today. But I want to share some of the people behind the scenes that were adherents to Marxist ideology. And the ideology was simply, or I would say the main gist of the ideology was to take control of the world. I was watching Bill Maher. I didn't watch the whole show. I don't really watch Bill Maher, but I saw a clip of Bill Maher and he was talking to someone. And when he was talking he was talking to actually Elon Musk. If you get a chance to look at that interview with Elon Musk that he did recently. And what he said with Elon Musk was all the resources are going to go away soon. And Elon Musk says, no, we got plenty of resources. There's no threat of our resources going away. And then Bill Maher said, well, all the water's going to go. We won't have water. And Elon Musk said, no, 70% of the earth is covered with water. It's an abundant resource. And then Bill Maher said, well, you can't drink most of it. And then there's a process, I think it's called salienation or saliation. And Elon Musk said, that's extremely cheap to do. And that's the only thing that needs to be done, to take water to make it able to be drank and to be consumed. But the reason I brought that up is Bill Maher was expressing this ideology that the global elite have. It's called hegemony. And what hegemony means, and you can look this up, hegemony is this idea that certain people are the ruling class of humanity and they deserve the resources. And so there's so many different things behind this whole concept of hegemony. And that's what the globalists are, those people who are the ruling elite. They have this idea of hegemony. And what that means is that the reason they are into population control is because they believe that when you have a huge population on the earth, that you have the bottom feeders and the rest of the 99 percenters that really don't deserve, that they'll take up the resources from those who deserve it, the one percenters, or I like to say the one half of one percenters. That's the ideology behind what they believe. And that's what Bill Maher was expressing. He basically believes he's an elite class. And he was saying, in essence, that we don't have enough resources, so we have too many people. That's what global warming is about. You know, I did a video on what the UN calls sustainable development. These are all terms for population control. And so what they believe is there's a limited amount of resources. And in order for us to sustain those resources, then you have to keep the population below a certain level. Even Bill Gates talked about that. Bill Gates believed that the population should be between 500 million and 1 billion people on the earth, because if not, then all the resources will go. But we know that that is counter to what the Bible says, because the Bible tells mankind to be fruitful and to multiply and fill the earth up, right? And so if God tells us to do that, then obviously God knows what he's talking about, and he's not going to tell us to do something that's going to cause our demise, right? He only gives us good things to do. And so anyway, let me read a couple quotes from people that hold to this globalist Marxist ideology, because Karl Marx's ultimate goal was to have something in place that helped to rule humanity, right? And that him and the people in his class, or people like him, I should say, would be the ones who would be in charge of the resources, and they would distribute the resources based on their whim and what they want to do. That's what socialism is, the redistribution of wealth, right? They believe that the resources should be in the hands of a few, and they're the ones who will be able to determine who gets what. But here's a quote from Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin, you probably are familiar with, from the Soviet Union. He says, "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted." He stated, "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted." Now, this quote carries a profound meaning, emphasizing the influential role of education in the shaping of the future. I want to say that again. I want you to hear what I just said. When he makes this quote, he is emphasizing the influential role education plays in shaping the future. Lenin recognizes the immense power of molding young minds, and he believes that by providing a comprehensive and transformative education, lasting change can be achieved. Now, think about this. Lenin is a Marxist, right? He is someone who is looking to control humanity. And so when he's talking about education and controlling education, he's not talking about it for the betterment of all people. He's talking about it as a form of control and compliance of the masses. Lenin's quote underscores the importance of investing in education, particularly at a young age. By focusing on shaping the minds of children, Lenin acknowledges that the values, knowledge, and skills instilled during their formative years will serve as the foundation for their entire lives. These teachings become deeply ingrained, influencing their perspectives, choices, and actions as they transition into adulthood. The significance of Lenin's statement lies in the recognition of the long-term implications of education. Rather than seeking immediate results, he highlights the necessity of patience and a long-term vision. Patience and a long-term vision. And as I talked to you, as I mentioned earlier, that they have this thing called the long march forward. And so they're patient, they're looking at things multi-generationally, and the strategy that they put in place is over 100 years old. So in order for you to understand what is happening, you have to recognize that we're the roots and the basis for what is happening in America now. And what do I mean by that? The schools in America especially have become indoctrination centers. So America used to be one of the highest of all the nations in educational results in math and science and reading. We used to be very, if not number one, we were very high up in the level of math, science, and reading. But now, if you look at it, I believe last time I saw we're around 40th, it might be higher or lower, but around 40th. And why is that? Why is one of the most richest countries in the world with more resources than anything? Why is it that we are sliding down so far in educational performance? Because part of it is our schools have become indoctrination centers, that they're not trying to teach math, science, and reading for the most part, with certain exceptions. They are literally trying to reteach morals to our young people, which is why in our schools now, they're not focusing on the educational piece as much as teaching our children alternative lifestyles and sex education and all these other things that are being taught in the schools. And and so we have to be careful and understand that this is intentional. Now, it's interesting because the enemy, the devil, is actually taking a page out of God's playbook, right? So in the Bible, in Psalms 22:6, it says, raise up a child in the way he should go, and when they're older, they will not depart from it. So Lenin is actually almost quoting the Bible in how you are to teach children. But the problem is, Marxists, communists, socialists, and all of them, it's an anti-God and anti-Christ philosophy because Karl Marx was an atheist. And here's a quote from Karl Marx. Karl Marx once explained that his object in life, listen to this, his object in life is to dethrone God and to destroy capitalism. Why is he saying destroy capitalism? Now, on the surface, they give it to you as though it's a good thing, but ultimately it's not. Why is that? Because in a capitalistic society, of course, you will have greed and you will have different and abuse of power and different things like that. But when you have a government like the United States, things were put in place. Now, they don't always go by it, and it's getting worse and worse, right? I will agree to that. But things were put in place to keep people from using overpowering influence in certain areas. That's why the whole idea of a monopoly or monopolies are illegal in America. And so when a company gets too big and powerful, the government comes in and breaks the companies up. That's what happened with Microsoft. That's what happened with Standard Oil with the Rockefeller family in the beginning and early part of the 20th century. The Rockefeller family owned Standard Oil, and they had a monopoly on petroleum. And so the government came in and broke the company up. And so it's like 3 or 4 different oil companies were formed from this one huge company. So it was with Microsoft. Bill Gates had the United States government came and they broke up Microsoft and took away some of their power because they were cornering the market. And they would have been basically, they would have been impossible to overcome, because if they're the only game in town, they have all the money and all the power and all the influence, then no one else could compete. But when you have a capitalistic society with free markets, other people can come up and they can compete. And so you just think about Walmart. Walmart had cornered the market, right? They were the largest, I don't know if you call them convenience store or whatever you call Walmart for a while. But then you have someone like Jeff Bezos who comes up with the idea, and with Amazon, right? So now Amazon is as big, or if not bigger than Walmart, and very influential, because instead of you driving to Walmart to get things, a lot of people, the first thing they do is get their smartphone or their computer and they look for the same item through Amazon and they order it and have it delivered to their house, right? So that's what a free market capitalistic society does. It gives other people the opportunity to compete, right? And there's other companies that's not as large as these, but they also can have a certain market share as well, because they're able to compete. So what does all this mean? Why is all this important? How does this line up? It lines up because in a Marxist society, they do away with capitalism. And so now you have the state or the government who's in charge of the resources, right? You don't have competition. You don't have anything that helps to fan the flames of excellence. And what do I mean by that? So if you're in a socialistic society, people aren't going to compete as much, because why would you compete when you're not going to profit off of it? When you have a free market capitalistic society, people are going to compete if they're going to get rewarded, right? If I can come up with a bigger idea than someone else, and I can come up with a better product, then I can make more money than the next person. So that's going to encourage me to try harder, right? To use my resources, my ingenuity, my gifts in order to try to, profit off of, right? To capitalize off of it. As opposed to other nations, Soviet communist nations, you don't have the same level. The only time people really push themselves is when the government comes in and forces them or threatens them to do it. Otherwise, everybody's going to get the same thing. So it doesn't encourage people to try harder. And this is a fact. This is a fact of human nature. If you guys have been under a rock, or if you're young and don't understand things, you have to recognize that the majority of people, if there's no incentive, they're not going to do their best. They're not going to do their best. And let me give you an example. So a college professor was doing an experiment on socialism, right? Socialism, the redistribution of wealth. It also, socialism is basically everybody gets the same thing. So this whole concept that they continue to promote of equity of outcomes, right? Equity of outcomes is dangerous. What we should want is not equity of outcomes, but we should want equity of opportunity. So if everyone's level across the board, then that's called equality of outcomes. We don't want equity of results, because equity of results means everybody's going to get the same thing regardless. And you could see when they were pushing Marxism a couple of decades ago, like in California, they were pushing Marxism a lot. Like, for instance, when you had participation trophies, it means you had a foot race, you had 10 people in there, all 10 people get the same trophy. You don't reward the winner. And so if that's the case, then why would anybody push themselves, right? Conversely, if I had a foot race and I'm running, my natural competitive nature is if I came in second or third or last, I'm going to go and say, let me train harder, let me try harder. So next time, hopefully I can win the race, right? So that pushes humanity to be the best version of themselves. Now, you're always going to have the people in the middle or in the bottom that just don't care. But I'm saying those people who have the ability and have the desire to do something special, competition is going to push that in them, and they're going to be a better version of themselves. So what this professor did that I was talking about, he wanted to do an experiment. So what he said was he's going to give tests, and everybody in the class was going to get the same grade no matter what. Everyone in the class is going, and that you guys already know where I'm going with this. And most of you already know what the outcome is going to be before I tell you. But anyway, first test he gave, you had people that always get A's. They get 100. They do extra credit. They're going to go the extra mile. They're going to get 100. You have the people that are B and C students that they may try hard. Maybe they're not as smart. Maybe they don't give 100%. They may give 80 or 90%. And some people like myself, many times, I knew I could do the work and it came kind of easy to me. So I didn't push myself. So I'd get a B or sometimes a C when I could have gotten an A, right? So you had the people that got the A's, the hundreds, you got the B and C students, and then you got the people that have D's or below or below performance, like a F or not good enough to pass the test, right? But the funny thing that happened after the third or fourth test, it didn't cause the C and D and F students to do better. It caused the A and B students to do worse. So now they put forth less effort because it didn't make sense for them to put forth more effort if they're going to get the same thing that everybody else got. Now, that's the concept of socialism, and that's how it works. When there is no incentive and you can't get more, no matter how much effort you put forward, human nature will determine that you don't put forth more effort. I mean, that's just common sense. All of us knows that. If everybody's going to get the same no matter what, it's not any incentive for people to try harder or push themselves to do the best that they can possibly do, right? So what happens is that has now, the Marxist ideology is now being promoted in schools. And so, like I said, in the United States school system, they're not promoting excellence to the degree that they should. And many times is they're making excuses for the kids, or they're not pushing them. And instead of pushing them for academic excellence, a lot of times in the public schools, they're just reteaching a new morality, or they are lowering the bar of expectation, especially in the minority communities. And I've seen this firsthand. They are lowering the bar of expectation, which means there's no incentive for those people who may have the desire and the ability to push themselves. And environment has a lot to do with the outcome of the people. But let me move forward a little bit with this. A few weeks ago, a Gallup poll published shocking results in a new poll showing the rising of godlessness in America. Because, like I said, uh, Karl Marx, his ultimate goal was to dethrone God because he didn't believe in God. He was an atheist, and to destroy capitalism. So we talked a little bit about capitalism and how, socialism is being more and more promoted in the public sector. And socialism means you get stuff, right? You get free stuff. No matter if you work harder or less harder than somebody else, you get the same things in return. But also, what it does is it erodes godliness, right? So godlessness is on the rise in America, and it's because of the infiltration of these ideologies of Karl Marx and some of the others, and it's intentional. That's a way to control the masses by not only dumbing down the masses, right, uh, and taking away their incentive for doing better, right? Because think about this: if you got up every day and you work 8 to 10 hours a day, busting your hump, trying to make a living, and your neighbor doesn't go to work, but you guys get the same paycheck, how dedicated and committed are you going to be to go to work every day? You just won't do it. Nobody would do that. Eventually, you're going to say, hey, I'm not going to go in and give 100% effort if this guy who's not doing anything is getting the same thing I'm getting, right? And so that's what happens. Also, when in Marxism and communism, the state ends up replacing God. The state ends up replacing God ultimately, because one of the things that they do in all these Marxist countries when they take over the government is they ban the Bible and they shut down churches, or they control the churches, because they understand that those people that have a relationship with God, they can transcend the culture around them, and they will now give the effort that they're giving to God. Right. And so that's why the Bible says, do everything as unto the Lord. And so for the most part, when you have people that have a relationship with God, then they're looking at the world in a different way. Right. And they are looking at God as their source as opposed to the state. And that's why the government and these Marxist governments intentionally give people a lot of stuff, because they understand if they give you free stuff and they incentivize bad behavior, then you'll continue in that same path. The average human being, I'm saying, I would say the majority, not the average, but the majority of humanity will do this. But anyway, we see this erosion of godliness, and it's because of this long-term strategy, I believe, that the Marxists put in place. So I'm going to read this. Let me read this from this KGB agent first, and I'm going to read what I was going to read about this poll, right? So there was a former KGB agent, and you can look him up. His name was Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov. I'm going to say that again. It's Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov, and he defected to Canada in 1970, and he claimed to know the details of a Soviet plan to undermine the U.S., not on the battlefield, but in the psyche of America and the American public. In 1984, Bezmenov gave an interview to G. Edward Griffin, from which much can be learned today about the plan. His most chilling point was that there's a psychological warfare of demoralization. It's a long game that takes decades to achieve, but it may already be bearing fruit. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. I'm going to read this again. I want you to hear what this says. One of the psychological warfare tactics that the globalists use is called demoralization. And I've seen this firsthand, and sometimes I get frustrated, sometimes I get upset, but I had to get over it because we still got work to do, right? But demoralization, it's a long game that takes decades to achieve, but it may already be bearing fruit. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. Bezmenov described this process as a great brainwashing that has four basic stages. The first stage is demoralization, which takes from 15 to 20 years to achieve. According to the former KGB agent, that is the minimum number of years it takes to re-educate one generation of students that is normally exposed to the ideology of its country. In other words, it takes time to change what people are thinking. He used examples of the 1960s and the hippie movement. And you have to recognize that the 1960s and the hippie movement was orchestrated. It wasn't a grassroots movement. And what happened was you had these countercultural people. They were originally like nerds. They were very straight-laced, educated, and they wanted to make a change in the system. And so what they did was they infiltrated them with these drug, sex-crazed people that put such a black eye on the hippie movement that they shut the hippie movement down. But the hippie movement was one of these movements. The drug culture, the free sex society, the rebellion against your parents, all those type of things are things that help to demoralize people, right? And what they did is they used like what you call popular culture to make it seem like that was the way to go. So the music, entertainment, and different things, they made it seem like it was cool to be, this drug crazed, sex crazed hippie, and it helped to demoralize, a certain generation of young people. Now this gets deeper. He says. In the 1960s, the hippies coming to position of power in the 80s in the government and business in America. So those hippies from the 60s that were affected by that culture, now they start to come into leadership in the 80s and the 80s and the 90s in government and business in America. Bezmenov claimed this generation was already contaminated by Marxist Leninist values. Of course, this claim that many baby boomers are somehow espoused to KGB tainted ideas is hard to believe, but Bezmenov's larger point addressed why people who have been gradually demoralized are unable to understand that this has happened to them. Referring to such people, Bezmenov said they are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli and certain patterns, like Pavlov's dog. And I was a psychology major, so you understand the concept of Pavlov's dog, which was conditioning. And you can use stimuli to eventually recondition someone's mind, and they will respond based on the stimuli that you train them to respond to. He goes on to say, you cannot change their mind even if you expose them to authentic information. Even if you prove that white is white and black is black, you still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. And that's what happens. And I've seen that a lot. When I do my lectures and my talks and I talk about things that are contrary to the popular narrative, and some of you may experience this as well. Sometimes I share things that are contrary to the popular narrative. And what happens is I have books, I got articles, I got facts and everything. But some people that are set in their mindset, they will not change even when they are presented with facts. And it's not dumb people. These are some educated people, some very people that I have a lot of respect and admiration for. But even when they're presented with facts, they have been demoralized and reprogrammed to the place where even when they are confronted with facts, the facts are irrelevant to them because their feelings have become more prevalent. As a pastor, I see that a lot. I'm preaching the word of God. I can give you scripture and verse. And a lot of times people in the pews or people that hear the messages, they see the verse, they see the chapter, they see the Bible, they hear it, but no matter what, they're going to stick to how they believe and what they feel. And even in Black America, a lot of the stuff that we've been trained to believe, we stick to it, and our emotions become more real than the facts, right? My experience becomes more real than the actual facts, and we can't use feelings or experience to dictate what is true and what is not true. We have to look at the larger picture and look at facts. I'm gonna end this article here, and then I'm gonna go back to this poll that I came across. As I mentioned before, this is from the article, exposure to true information does not matter anymore, says Bezmenov. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, and I'll say he or she, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures. Even if I took him to, he says in this article, this is Bismarck, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he receives a kick in his fan bottom, he says. So that was an article. This is a gentleman from the 1970s. I've heard some of his lectures, and he's warning Americans about the psychological warfare that was taking place. And I would say to you that that was 40, 50 years ago, and I can see firsthand a lot of that has taken root. Now, here's the article I was referencing earlier. A few weeks ago, Gallup, which is a people that do polls, published shocking results of a new poll showing rising godlessness in America. Through the poll showed the majority of Americans still believe in a supreme being. The percentage of Americans without that belief has dropped a whopping 6% since 2017. The current 81% of believers stand in stark contrast to 90+% of Americans who believed in God up until 2011. So in 2011, 90% of people believed in God. Now in America, only 81%. Specifically, the poll showed this unbelief was almost exclusively among liberals and the young. Conservatives and married adults have had essentially no change. The groups with the largest declines are also the groups that are currently least likely to believe in God, including liberals, which is 62%, young adults, 68%, and Democrats, 72%. Believe in God is the highest among political conservatives and Republicans. And so this is an erosion. And you have to realize that when you talk about conservative versus liberal, conservative, the concept of a conservative is someone who likes the status quo. They want things to stay the same. And of course, we've made it into more of a political thing and bad versus good and different things like that. But when you look at certain family values, like belief in God, belief that marriage should be between a man and a woman, belief that certain principles are important, right? Hard work and all those other things. Those are more lined up with what you would call conservative values. Now, the liberals who have infiltrated a lot of the educational institutions, they look to change things. Now, sometimes change is good, of course. But when you start talking about the basic institutions that have sustained cultures, communities, and ethnicities, these principles of family, of God, and of the other type of morals and values, those are things that we should all be conservative in. I'm conservative in what I believe the family is supposed to be, God's role in family, the church's role in the family, and those type of things. How we are the ones that are supposed to train our children and not the government, because the government should only, when I send my children to school, they should only go there to learn math, science, history, reading, and those type of things. Morality, what is right, the concept of God, those are things that the family is supposed to teach a person. And when the family does that, it creates strong individuals, which creates strong communities. But when you turn that around, it weakens the people and allows the people to be more controlled. And so here's ultimately what it is, and I'm going to bring this to a close. So the Marxist ideology, through this thing called critical theory, right? So critical theory was created. So the Marxist, Karl Marx was German. He started in Germany, and he tried to implement his Marxist ideology in Germany, but the Nazis were able to push back and keep it from happening. So Karl Marx left Germany and goes into Russia. And when he goes into Russia, he's able to implement communism comes into play. And you have these people in Russia now that are promoting this Marxist ideology, and even China under a communist regime, Mao Zedong and some of these other people were able to implement communism, which is a form of Marxism as well. And so, of course, now they are alternately, they're trying to promote that around the world in order to control the masses, because ultimately they want to control the masses in a way that they have the authority over the resources, and then they distribute it based on what they want. It's a form of control and authoritative control. And one of the things that always gets me is when people are talking about dictatorship, totalitarian government. And here's what I want you guys to do. I want you not to fall for the bait and switch for what they call the old okey doke, because a lot of people, especially these stars and these pawns, these boule people and all these other people that are put into place, right, by the powers that be. And they're trying to tell you, like I heard Robert De Niro the other day, and he was saying some hateful stuff, but he was basically criticizing the dialogue, the conversation that someone says, and basically he was saying that, which a lot of the liberals are saying now, that you shouldn't be able to say whatever is on your mind. You shouldn't be able to say things that offend people. You know, we got to shut this person down. We should deplatform or cancel people when they go on social media or in the media and they say things that are offensive. We should deplatform and shut them down. And they should not be able to say certain things. You have to say things that are politically correct. But I want you guys not to fall for that, because that is one of the first things that the Marxists and the communists always do. Every totalitarian government, the first thing they do is try to quiet your voices. They try to tell you you can't say certain things. They control your language. And so whenever you hear people controlling language, because you should be able to say whatever you want to say, even if I don't agree with you. There's very few limitations on free speech, right? But one of the limitations, there's no limitation on free speech based on whether you get offended by or you don't want to hear it, right? And so you got to be careful with that. But what the Marxists do is they want to destroy the institutions that make people strong. So Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, who wrote the Communist Manifesto, they were against the nuclear family, right? And so that's one of the ways that you start to control and destroy a culture, is by destroying the family structure. You also go against religion. And so not only do they, you know, when you look in a communist country, they either control the churches and tell them what to say, or they shut the churches down and close the Bibles. So the church, family, and the family values that help to make us strong are the ones that they go against, because if they can destroy that, it erodes at the individual, and then it makes the individual more weak. And once you're weakened by the destruction of these institutions, now you are open game for the government to come in and take over, because you'll be dependent on the government, you'll be controlled by the government, and you won't have the will to go against what the government is trying to tell you what to do. And so that's why our Constitution is one of the greatest documents in the earth. The Bible is the greatest document ever, but I'm saying as far as civil government, because the First Amendment was important, because they understood the importance of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of the assembly, and all those other things, in order to limit the amount of government and limit the government's ability to control you. The other part of that, of course, is the family. So instead of the government strengthening families, the government now has taken the place of the family, right? Through the social programs and different things like that. Instead of encouraging strong families, they do the opposite. And they actually give money to single mothers. And when the single mom and the dad want to get married, they lose their benefits. So it doesn't incentivize marriage and family, it decentivizes it. And so these are strategies that are not new. They're strategies of the enemy. And we have allowed it to become political when it's not political, people. I want you to understand, what I'm talking to you about is not based on Democrat or Republican. It's not based on right or left wing. It's not based on anything. These are principles that are godly principles that the enemy is doing the opposite in order to destroy individuals, by destroying families and taking us away from our relationship with God. Please, like I said, like, subscribe, and share. Even if you disagree with what I'm saying, share it with somebody else and have a discussion about it. And send me a message and tell me how I'm wrong, which I don't believe I am, because I have receipts. But anyway, also, don't forget my most recent book, The Religion of Race. It's a phenomenal book, I believe, that really is a great and needed topic to talk about right now. Until next time, peace and blessings to you. Shalom, shalom. I love you.